What does the goddamn line say, Tony?
Please do not use gendered language.
Then what? I'll be arrested, put in airport jail?
Look, you're going completely sideways, man.
It's a big club, and you ain't in it.
How dare you?
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
I'm Chris Hansen with Dave on NBC.
Jack Marius Tack Theratrix.
Hi, I'm Spartacus.
Jackson, Sacramento, he, him. Steven Seagal.
Sex offender guy.
I'm Keith Morris.
This is Mumbai Kutapi.
I'm Rick James, bitch.
Sorting through the lies.
The hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
We cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
And uncovering the centuries-long plan for world domination.
Learning about Cuba, having some food.
Let's talk about Chinese people.
Have you ever been in a Turkish prison? Swangles in Fort Lauderdale.
I have sent 6 of my Libyan missiles to blow up the Sears hardware department.
Nothing could be more fun than jumping off a cliff with 2 German bisexuals.
Oh, you English are so superior, aren't you?
Thank you, comrade.
And now, Macroaggressions.
That's what assholes call it.
With your host,
Buddy, I don't know who you are, but you're about to get chlamydia.
Charlie Robinson.
Hey, Whitey, where's your hat?
You want to drop the blame on Charlie and say it's all Charlie's fault.
He was a retard.
I get some goddamn diuretic.
Welcome to Macroaggressions. I am your host, Charlie Robinson. If you are watching us on the legendary, iconic, or you're listening to us wherever podcasts are served, we certainly do appreciate your support. We can't do it without you. We can't do it without the help of our sponsors. And I'll tell you what, if 2020 has taught us anything, it's that you got to get yourself prepared. I mean, shoot, prepare yourself for earthquakes and hurricanes and tidal waves and locusts and all that stuff. I mean, that's the normal stuff you have to prepare for. Now we have to take into account coronavirus and asteroids, if you listen to Shepard and Bellis, and all kinds of things going on. So listen, there's a lull in the insanity right now, it seems like a little bit. So get yourself prepared. Take this time and opportunity to do what you know you need to do, and that is get ready. So we've done a deal with My Patriot Supply. They've been super nice to us. They've offered us a discount of $100 off of a 4-week supply of food. They have all kinds of things there. Emergency survival food, long-term food storage, short-term bulk cans. They've got fruits and vegetables. They've got survival gear. They have cooking equipment. They have power and lighting. They have water filtration, air purification. They've got just about everything. But you got to go to preparewithmacroaggressions.com. And if you go through that link, they'll give you $100 off. You might as well take it. You're going to need this stuff. What's the worst that can happen? You have a bunch of bulk food left over. You're going to eat it eventually. This stuff will keep for a long, long time as well. So, take advantage of this downtime when you know that you're going to need to prepare for these things. And listen, if you don't buy it from us or from My Patriot Supply, buy it somewhere. Just get yourself prepared. We certainly do appreciate it. Any support for this, for My Patriot Supply, also helps to support the show, which we love. So let's just jump into this episode, because I was talking to Tony Merkel one day, who does the podcast The Confessionals, and he said, I've got a friend that I want you to meet. He had an idea for a logo for you. He had this idea. I'll let him tell the story, but if you notice that the logo has changed, this is the reason why. So I want to introduce people to Alika, Spahn, Naihe, and Naihe. Dude, give me your last name. I just butchered it, for God's sake.
No problem. Alika, Spahn, Naihe.
There we go. And Alika is, so we got on this call where we were all talking, me and Alika and Tony, and he said, I have this idea. You tell the story. Go ahead.
Okay. So Tony showed me original logo, asked me if I had any ideas with it, and I said, well, I'm probably going to listen to a couple episodes first. So I listened to a few episodes, and I just watched the way you were moving and the way you were talking and just listening to your energy in it. And it sounded like you had a mountain of stuff to say, and you had to just like, I
got a little Alex Jones. Yeah. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
There's no doubt.
Very passionate.
I mean, I'm not turning the frogs. They're turning the frogs gay. I mean, I'm not going that far, but like, there's part of me that kind of wants to. I won't lie.
Yeah.
So that logo, then you're like, oh, I have this idea, and you send it over. I was like, oh my God, are you kidding me? This is it, man. This is you're like, do some, let me put this together for you, and the gas mask and the smoke. And I love it. I think it's cool. I think it encapsulates the show because it's called Macroaggressions, and I'm like ranting and raving like a lunatic, and the picture kind of symbolic of that. So I love it, man. And that's the kind of the cool thing that I've learned about this from in the short time I've been doing podcasts is that the audience is super interactive and way into it and way, they want to, I get emails from people. I get people saying, oh, you did this part wrong. I'm a farmer and I have a background in farming and you got this part wrong. It's like, great. I don't have a background in farming, so every now and then I'll get corrected on stuff and I appreciate that. I'll get letters, or I'll get emails that say, hey man, keep going. In logos, I mean, I've just been blown away by the support and so to have you, and so where this conversation led to, as we're talking about the logo, we wound up talking about some other things too. And you're from Hawaii, live in Hawaii, and we started talking about the history of Hawaii, like the untold. I'm a huge fan of Oliver Stone's documentary series called The Untold History of the United States. And I feel like the untold history of Hawaii is fascinating. And so we started talking about this. We got about 15 minutes in and I was like, we got to do a show about this because in the continental United States, when you go to school, first of all, you get American history, but it's garbage anyway. But even if you did, you don't get Hawaiian history. I don't get Alaskan history. I don't get Puerto Rican history. I don't get any of these states or territories or that the United States has relationships with. We don't hear anything about that. I only know what I know about Hawaii is what I've learned for the times that I've gone to Hawaii. But if it wasn't for that, I would know nothing. And so to have you start to explain this and the generational aspects to your family, you said you could trace your family back hundreds of years there. Like, this is magical to me. And so I'm starting to have to think like a podcast producer and think like, this is interesting. This is an interesting story. Normally it would just be a conversation you and I had, but instead it was like, I want to do a show, save this for the show. Let's talk about Hawaiian history and Hawaiian culture because it's super fascinating. And I guarantee you there aren't too many shows talking about it right now that are talking about conspiracies and things like this. But I remember one of the things that tied this whole thing together for me was Smedley Butler's book, War is a Racket. And they're talking about how they would go to war. The government would have the military kind of fight these battles for them. And it would be on behalf of like United Fruit, for bananas and sugar and all this. And it leads me to Hawaii because I know about Dole pineapple. I know about the sugar industry there. And that whenever you've got something that the white guys like and the white guys want, trading wise, they'll find a way to ingratiate themselves or integrate themselves into this system. And next thing you know, they've taken it over and screwed it all up. So tell me a little bit about you and like your background and where we start with this whole thing.
Okay. So I'm born and raised in Hawaii. I'm Native Hawaiian. I actually have a whole bunch of different mixes in me because, Hawaii is kind of the melting pot of the Pacific ever since industry started here way back in the 1800s. And so throughout my life, I really only got the elementary version of my Hawaiian history. Even living in Hawaii, a lot of schools don't teach the full Hawaiian history. We teach, schools are kind of mandated to teach whatever the U.S. teaches about Hawaii, or the U.S. would say is appropriate to teach about Hawaii. And so I got a spoon-fed the regular version, and then as I got older, I actually didn't start learning about the true history until I decided to become a professional artist. I worked for Pearl Harbor for about 7 years. I was a personal electrician on the attack submarines for the Navy, and then I moved up into electrical engineering technician. And so I was very much into that. I liked it, but over time, I was always drawing ever since I was small. So I ended up just deciding to leave Pearl Harbor and do what actually makes me feel really good every day, and became a professional artist.
Yay! About time.
Yeah.
Someone's doing that, It's not too late to quit your shitty job and do something that you love. My God. I mean, we all do. Listen, I'm as guilty of that in the past as anybody, but that's refreshing to hear that, man. And of course, obviously, I'm partial to your artwork because I think it's awesome, but yeah, man, I love it. That's great that you recognize that transitioned into art. Yeah.
And so I just went into that full blast, and I really started learning about my history when I started getting into projects that had to deal with Hawaiian history. And as an artist, I like to, if I'm going to depict something that is based on fact, like if I have to do older pictures or things based off of references from older times, then I want to make sure it's correct. And so I started digging into the history, and one thing led to another. I'm kind of a professional rabbit hole explorer. Yeah. So
love it.
I love
why you're listening to the show, which is why you're listening to Tony's show. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love that kind of stuff and finding out different alternate views on everything. Yeah. And so I really started learning about the history, and the stuff fascinated me. And so it wasn't until my mid-20s that I really started learning about Hawaiian history in its entirety, and a lot of the implications that are made from both sides and all of the old documentation and whatnot. And I'm 33 now. I'm going to be 34 in 2 weeks. So it's been about 10 years where I really started learning and appreciating the history. So disclaimer, I'm not a doctor in Hawaiian history or anything like that. I don't have any degrees. I just do a lot of research. And so anything that comes out of my mouth is off the top of my head and based off of stuff I know. I don't have any notes in front of me or anything like that.
Well, but that's probably good, because as we've learned, the universities and system is heavily controlled. So if there was a version of Hawaiian history, a true version of Hawaiian history, you might not be able to teach it anyway. So having that degree or having a PhD in it might not necessarily, it might validate you in some people's eyes, but I think the people that are listening to this know that doesn't necessarily mean that it just means that you're able to play the game in the university system and wind up getting yourself, having a degree or having a PhD or being a doctorate or teaching it or whatever. There's right. that comes with some trade-offs where you don't get to tell the whole story. So I actually prefer that you don't have all of the fancy, degrees on your wall with showing that you have an official designation as a Hawaiian historian, because that doesn't mean anything to me. The fact that you're living it and have the, and are a professional rabbit holer, that's better to me. So where do we start with this? Most people don't even know when Hawaii became a state. They don't know the process for that. They don't know what happened before that. They don't know what happened, with Pearl Harbor necessarily. We hear a little bit about it, and we know very little. But so what is the United States' relationship with Hawaii, and how did that develop over the years?
Okay, so the relationship started way back in the early 1800s. So King Kamehameha, everybody knows who he is, I hope.
Was it 1, 2, or 3, 4, or 5?
The first.
The Great. Okay.
Yeah. So he was the mo'i, or supreme ruler of all of Hawaii. He took over every island basically except for Kauai. And everybody agreed that they would all end up in one kingdom. And so, and if they didn't agree, they got beaten. So everybody
that happens.
That happens. So it all got unified, and the Hawaiian kingdom was essentially born within Hawaii. And so fast forward to about 40, 50 years, Koikeoli, Kamehameha the Third, ended up starting having national recognition or international recognition for the nation of Hawaii as its own nation state. And so where America comes in is all the way back from Kamehameha the Great. There were American ships that would come in, and that actually helped Kamehameha unify the islands by he would trade, and he got guns and cannons, all kinds of new advanced weaponry to aid him in his conquest. And so the relationship started from all the way back then. And so it was really good. It was really friendly. It was a good relationship. Our main friends were the British, the Americans, and the French. And so that was kind of our template to follow. And so from Kamehameha the First through to Kamehameha the Third, we're watching and studying and traveling all over the world and seeing how governments are run all over the world. And so we are inspired by the French, the Romans, the British. And we took all these different cues. And in 1843, Koikeoli ended up as a resolution to what is known now as the Paulette event or the Paulette incident. There was a ship captain, Paulette, that ended up from Great Britain. He was a rogue captain. He came in and he took over. He was accusing the Hawaiians of treating British nationals poorly. And he ended up taking over and making a bunch of demands. And Koikeoli was rather upset about that. And so another captain came over, Admiral Thomas. He came from Great Britain, and he came down after Koikeoli let them know, like, hey, there's some stuff going on here. We're supposed to be friends. This crazy guy is trying to take over my kingdom, and I need some help. And so Admiral Thomas came over, and in July of 1843, he basically said, this is a nation state, a free nation state, a sovereign nation state. This is its own country, and it solidified the international recognition of Hawaii as its own nation state. And then, as the years went on, a constitution was written up, and Koikeoli initiated that movement. At the age of 13, he actually worked with his entire group of advisors, and they came up with laws that the entire kingdom would follow. So wow. He died at the age of 30. So in his short life, he changed the Hawaiian world forever. He really actually created a country where freedom was real for everybody that came. And in a time when you still had second-class citizens and blacks being considered not even human beings in the U.S., we had a kingdom, a nation where everybody was free. You came in, you pledged allegiance to the kingdom as a subject of the Hawaiian kingdom. And from that point, you were a Hawaiian national. And the term Hawaiian actually isn't even an ethnicity. It is a nationality. And the ethnicity for Hawaiians, like I have Native Hawaiian blood, is Kanaka Maoli. So I'm Kanaka Maoli.
Okay.
And that's my ethnicity, but my nationality is Hawaiian.
Gotcha.
Right.
Okay.
So with that, everything moved forward. The British helped us become recognized. And during that time, concurrently, at the same time, Koikeoli sent out 2 dignitaries to nations all around the world in order to let them know we're a nation state, we're seeking recognition. Mm-hmm. And so they went all around the world, and eventually every single country that existed at the time had treaties with Hawaii, national treaties. And so we were a real country, like a real kingdom, and So as you fast forward through the times to the takeover, the overthrow, you asked when we became a state. Mm-hmm. And so that was in 1959. So let's start from there. 1959, there was and then we'll move backwards.
Okay.
There was an election to ask if the people in the territory of Hawaii wanted to become a state, and it was just so glossed over. It happened pretty quickly, and everything, 90% of people said they wanted to become a state, so become a state. But that was also falsified. So let's move backwards. Before that, we were a territory. Before that was the overthrow. The overthrow happened in 1893. The reason the overthrow happened, there's a lot of different reasons, but there was military reasons for us being a prime location in the Pacific, as a strategic location to hit the entire continent of Asia whenever we wanted to, pretty much, or for the U.S. to hit it whenever they wanted to. And then there's, of course, the money reasons. So there was a lot of business here with sugar and pineapples, and a lot of American businessmen came here. Established their own businesses, started taking over land, and they're making a lot of money, and they really wanted to secure that for the long haul. Mm-hmm. So what they started doing slowly from about the 1860s on, they slowly started to form groups where everybody would convene and kind of strategize. You would call that now conspiracy, right? They would strategize on how are we going to slowly take this over, because the American mindset still didn't see the Hawaiians as equals, this is okay, whatever, you're a country, yeah, we'll just make our money here, and if we really want to, we'll just take it over. That felt like what the attitude was.
Yeah, I'm sure it was.
Of course, this is not all Americans. There's no overgeneralizations. There are a lot of really good Americans in our history as well. But the businessmen, the greedy ones, they ended up coming together and forming a group and a strategy and a plan. And so they really executed on that with King Kalakaua. So King Kalakaua was the last ruling king. He died in 1891, and then his sister, Liliuokalani, she became the only ruling queen and the final monarch of
and well respected too, right?
Well respected. People loved her, and so with what they did was they went up to the king Kalakaua and basically forced him to sign a constitution that gave away his power completely. And so he would become a figurehead, no real executive power. Mm-hmm. And the cabinet, because of the way the construction, or because of the way the constitution was written from the ruler before him, Kamehameha the Great, he decided to write a constitution where, because he wanted to balance everything out, where the legislature had to agree with the king in order for anything to be enacted and official. Mm-hmm. And so, because he did that, the Americans saw this as an opportunity. Like, oh, okay, so you need legislation or legislature to agree with you before anything happens. So what they started doing, or what they did, was they forced the king to put all of them into positions of the legislature. Mm. And then say that he had no real power. Basically, the legislature would run the entire kingdom. From that point forward, it's known as the Bayonet Constitution, because they said, like, we'll make you sign this at gunpoint if necessary.
Right.
I mean, really, some gangster shit.
Yeah.
So
yeah, for sure. We tend to think that like gangsters were only started like with Al Capone and everything. Like, governments have been gangsters for a long time, man. That is Absolutely. Some gangster shit. You're right.
Yeah.
Nice country. Nice country you got there. To be ashamed if something bad happened to it, right?
Exactly. So they secured all the positions basically of the legislature, and from that point on, they made it hell for Kalakaua and they made it hell for Liliuokalani. They fought to try and get some kind of power back. But in order to stop that, I think they called it the Committee of Safety. First was known as the Honolulu Rifles. It's all of these businessmen that were conspirators for treason. Mm-hmm. There were also Hawaiian nationals, which is like salt in the wound.
Yeah,
like it was pretty hurtful, but it was treason. And so they all got together after Liliuokalani took over, and they conspired again to stage a coup and take over everything. And so that's what they did. They conspired with the U.S. military, and they got the USS Boston to show up in Honolulu in 1893. And they had the backing of men with rifles, cannons from the ship, all pointing at Iolani Palace, where Queen Liliuokalani was living. And they marched on and basically said, hey, guess what? We're taking over. And if you don't agree with us, we're going to have a war.
Wow.
And so Liliuokalani was very wise. Even, Hawaiians still today, I hear them, they're upset because, why didn't we fight back? Liliuokalani decided not to fight back. She decided to abdicate her power under duress, mm-hmm. so that President Grover Cleveland, she wrote a letter to President Grover Cleveland to investigate this matter, to say, hey, there's an act of war going on at my doorstep by your nation, and your military is here, and we need to get this figured out. And so that was the point where everything was taken over. She abdicated her power, and a lot of Hawaiians today still think it was a bad idea, but
she was so slaughtered, right?
Exactly. Not only that,
everyone would have.
Everybody would have been slaughtered. She wanted to avoid bloodshed. But not only that, if we had in fact fought back, we would have inevitably been slaughtered. And then the U.S. could rightfully take Hawaii as spoils of war. Mm-hmm. Just like the Spanish-American War. That's how they got the southern states. So or the southwest states. So she didn't want that to happen. And she abdicated her power. So then President Grover Cleveland was like, hey, this is ridiculous. So he sent somebody over to investigate, James Blount. And he made a report. And in that report, he concluded that, this is in fact an act of treason by war criminals, mm-hmm. Hawaiian nationals, as well as American nationals. And these are the people, and this is what happened. And so Grover Cleveland made a statement saying, like, this is ridiculous. This was an act of war. This is horrible, and we need to reverse this. But before he could do that, McKinley was voted in. Mm. McKinley was all for annexation. He loved it. It was a big move for the economy because they had so much investment here. Yeah. And so McKinley said, I guess it's annexation time. And so it became a territory. The U.S. became a territory, and it became a territory with the Republic of Hawaii, it was the Republic of Hawaii that was the governing body. Now, it was basically the same people that took everything over, all of these treasonous war criminals. They were running everything, and they ran the Republic of Hawaii. And then eventually we became a state, we became a state, and that was annexed by the United States. And even the annexation itself was fraudulent, because in order to annex a country, you need to have the governments of both countries come in, make an agreement, a peace treaty, sign it, and then you can be annexed. Mm-hmm. But if you have the government de facto, which is the occupiers, basically, the American government that was here was a puppet government.
Right.
The Republic of Hawaii was basically a puppet government. And so there's an American puppet government that signed the treaty with the United States. Mm-hmm. So the rightful government of Hawaii, which was the constitutional monarchy, Liliuokalani, did not sign a peace treaty with the United States. So to this very day, that annexation is illegal. It's voided. It's not even real. It's basically like selling something to yourself, like,
right.
Can't do that. And so that whole thing is false. And then we became a territory. That was all of that from that very day, from the annexation, everything all the way up to today that we're a state under the United States. All of it is false. All of it is illegal. The paperwork is null and void.
Wow. It's like being, a minor who can't consent to a contract, or being, under duress, and you sign a contract, but it's like, hey, listen, this is invalid because I was not able to, rightfully consent to this, or I was not of sound mind, or I was a part of a puppet government that was taken over. And that's interesting. So I wonder how obviously it's probably an exercise in futility at this point, considering how savage and insane the United States government is. But I wonder what that would be like if Hawaii found a way to pull away and nullify that whole agreement. I wonder what that would look like. We'd have to change all the flags. We'd have to go take the stars off of all the flags. We'd have to make America great again. China making new flags for us, But so you go from that. So you become when World War II happened, when Pearl Harbor broke out, you were still a territory, correct?
Yes.
Was there anything where was Hawaii treated differently because in the mind of the United States, because it was a territory? And what I mean is, should there have been a stronger presence on, when Pearl Harbor was bombed to defend you guys, or were you kind of like, we'll leave them out on their own because they're just a territory, they're not really part of the United States?
Well, there was actually the reason why we were attacked was because there was such a giant presence here, giant military presence, and that's what was making Japan look at Hawaii like, hey, we've got to do something about this, and so we're going to go take out their ships.
Yeah.
And so we had such a really good relationship with Japan. So interesting that you bring up Pearl Harbor. Because a lot of people are like, oh, you're lucky that the U.S. took over, because Japan would have taken over anyway, or Germany would have taken over, somebody would have taken over, except for the fact that we had peace treaties with all of these people. We're recognized as a neutral country. Koikeole Kamehameha the Great was actually the first monarch to declare that his country was neutral, and Switzerland actually got it from them.
Really? So, that's fascinating. And he was the same one. He did the Great Mahele, is that it? The division of lands?
Yes.
That was his thing. So that's a pretty forward thinking guy, to think about, to come up with, like you said, you guys imported culture, governmental culture from the Romans and from the Greeks and from, you took a look at everything and sort of, it looked like you incorporated, some of the best parts into it. That's fascinating that he was so ahead of his time in, 1848 to come up with all of these ideas. Everyone knows Switzerland. Well, we shouldn't say everybody knows Switzerland is neutral, but Switzerland is neutral. And I never knew that. I didn't know where they came up with it. I just knew that that's what they are. I never knew that they got that from Hawaii.
Right. Yeah. And it just blows my mind that he died when he was younger than I am right now. And he did all of that. He was just like, thrust into greatness.
Like he was writing laws at 13 and everything. Like I was like in Little League and I was doing nothing,
Yeah.
Fascinating.
It was absolutely fascinating. And
so what was the relationship like with Japan before this?
Okay, so during the time of Kalakaua, Japan actually wasn't a country yet. Hawaii was the first recognized country outside of Europe, pretty much.
Wow.
The first recognized country.
I had no idea.
Outside of the Western world. And so not outside of Europe, sorry, outside of the Western, the white countries. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So So they were before Japan, and Japan actually sought recognition from Hawaii first. So Japan actually became a country through Liliuokalani vouching for them to become a country. Kalakaua, they spoke to Kalakaua, and there's pictures of them meeting as dignitaries, and it was pretty amazing to find that out too, just that little tidbit. And by the way, if I get any facts wrong, I welcome correction. So okay, cool. I'm just off the top of my head.
Send them to me, I'll send them on.
That's speaking to the viewers. So Japan was in really good relations with Hawaii. And I feel like that's why when they came and bombed in Pearl Harbor, they only bombed Pearl Harbor and Wheeler Air Force Base. They were only bombing the American installations. They didn't come and just create scorched earth. They didn't just destroy all of Hawaii. They only went after the U.S. targets.
Yeah.
So
understandable too. I mean, I get it from a strategic standpoint when you're Japan and you're looking at what your options are, and we're starting to choke off oil supplies, getting in and out, and they're like, shit, we got to figure something else out. Start looking around, and of course we get the false story on World War II, in our history books. So it wouldn't surprise me if there was a much different version of events that led up to that than what we've been told. But you guys you think you wouldn't have been a target of Japan as Japan is colonizing, going through the Philippines and Korea and parts of China and places like that, and then dropping down into Indonesia and fighting. You don't think that Hawaii would have been on their radar because of the relationship that you guys had early on? You think that was enough to maybe steer them out? I guess it doesn't matter because America was involved and that made you guys a target, but otherwise that relationship was strong enough to maybe, get a pass from the Empire of Japan at that time?
I believe so. Also, like just thinking about it, it was a stretch just for them to make it here and do one bombing run. Yeah. Like, what were they gonna do? When they get here, fuel's almost gone. Yeah. Let's try and I don't know. Maybe we'll talk to somebody. We would just shoot as many people as we can. Yeah. Like there's not too much. I don't think they had a motivation to take over anything here anyway. And even if they did, and we weren't a territory, I'm sure that the U.S. would have came to fight them anyway. Yeah, because it's too close to the U.S. Yeah. Whether they had interest in taking over Hawaii or not, it's too close to the U.S. Mm-hmm. So the U.S. would have fought with Japan anyway. Yeah. So I don't think Japan would have taken over to begin with.
Well, I guess we'll never know. But so So we fast forward to 1959. You guys become a state, an official state of the United States. What did that do? What did that do to the governmental side? What did that do to the culture? What was the change like?
Well, I saw it more as a continuing of the effects of the annexation. Okay. It was just even more so. Now you have federal backing. That was about it. Like now we have access to federal support, and that's it. But it was already becoming a little U.S. It was already becoming heavily Americanized, Westernized. Mm-hmm. All the way from before annexation, when the missionaries were allowed to come in. Mm-hmm. The missions started with good intentions. To bring the word of God, and they brought literacy, and the Hawaiians took to literacy like crazy. We're the most literate nation in the world for a long time, for a while. This tiny little isolated place is one of the most literate nations in the world. Wow, awesome. So
it's the key. Yeah. I mean, I feel bad for people that don't read, but like I think this. I think like. Somewhere like 1 in 4 people in the United States can't read. That's why they have the picture menus at McDonald's. I mean, it's an indictment on our education culturally and our education system too. It's a shame, but so that's fascinating. I didn't know that Hawaii had such a high literacy rate.
Yeah. Oh, well, this is speaking at the time of as when the missionaries came and taught, but today, definitely not the same story. Our education system is one of the worst in the nation or in the US, compared to that. But at that time, when the missionaries came in, it was a big deal to be literate. And all of the kings from that point forward, the kings and queen consorts pushed forward literacy. Kauikeoli, Kamehameha the Great, once again stated that his nation would be a literate nation. It would be one of literacy. And so he started schools. He started a compulsory schooling system that taught both culture as well as education. So like scholarly things as well as cultural things.
So how did that? So we're talking about literacy, but there's a different Hawaiian alphabet.
Yeah.
So how does that factor into to how our vision right now is that everyone in Hawaii speaks English, but what we forget, we Western, mainland people, is that you guys had your own alphabet, you had your own language and everything going on. How'd that work in the past, and how'd that transfer into standardized English that we have today?
Okay, so originally our language it's a completely oral language, like completely oral history. Nothing was written down. And so that's why, about hula, then you have oli, which are chants, and mele, which are songs. All of these things were what the entire culture pretty much was composed of. Mm-hmm. The whole entire culture was composed in these songs and chants and dances that we use to record our history.
Right. So
over
no history
millennia.
Books. You had history songs.
Yes.
Easier to remember. Probably more impactful. I can't remember
absolutely.
what I read in a history book necessarily, but if I were to hear a specific song all the time, or I Pledge of Allegiance or Star Spangled Banner or whatever. I mean, there you go.
Right. When you make it a song, it becomes, or even when you make it a dance, even just making it a story, it becomes ingrained into you in more ways than one. And so that's how the history was transferred for over 2,000 years, all the way down to that point in time in the 1800s when, now we've got some language. So, or now we've got some letters to read and write our language. And so it was just basically the sounds that we made in the oral language transferred over with the English letters. Okay. And so that's how it became 13 letters.
Yeah.
And from that point forward, every chance we got to write things down, we would. And so like the Hawaiian newspaper, I forget what the full name was, Ko'oko'a, I think. So that was the Hawaiian newspaper in Lahaina. They made the first color printed newspaper in the world.
Wow.
And it was the Hawaiian flag. Huh. And they had it on the front page, and it was the first color printed paper in the whole world. It's so cool.
That in Lahaina.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so with that, the newspapers became the main source of history. Previous to this, and when all the history was oral, you would only know certain things that was within your kuleana. Your kuleana is your responsibility, your rights that you're born into. So you get to learn these kinds of skills, a certain kind of knowledge. Like if you were a fisherman, if your family came from a long line of fishermen, you would have the kuleana of that. And so you would know all the chants, all the stories, all the ways to make hooks, all the people to go to get your netting. You would learn all of that stuff. That's all a part of it. But certain kuleana, you wouldn't learn other certain kuleana. If you were born a certain way, you wouldn't learn other ones. Gotcha. Because you wouldn't need to, So
but the newspaper bridged that gap.
Yes, the newspaper became a place now where everybody got to know everything from everybody else. And it became a source of history for Hawaiians, written by Hawaiians in the Hawaiian language. And so it was really, really interesting to see that. And then slowly, though, the missionaries started using certain Hawaiian words to mean things that it didn't really mean. Because the language is so oral before, was purely oral before, it was so contextual. So you could say one thing and mean another thing, but you would need to know the culture and the language to understand what it actually means. And so because it's so contextual, every word had like 20 different meanings, depending on the situation. And so one of those words is mana. Mana means, it was taught to mean spiritual power. And the missionaries really used that word a lot to push forward their narrative of God only being one God and only one God overall. And God has mana, and anything that everything related to God is mana, mana, mana. And so it's slowly, that was the beginning of the hijacking of the language.
Gotcha.
And so from that point forward, slowly outside influences started to cinch down harder and harder on the language, to the point where after annexation, you'd be beaten for speaking Hawaiian in a school. Hawaiian language became illegal or banned. It wasn't illegal, but it was effectively illegal because it was banned to be spoken at the schools. And if it's banned at the schools, and you can't speak it all day, your parents aren't going to teach it to you because they want you to not be beaten in school, and they're going to make sure you only speak English. And so, mind you, during the time of when the missionaries came and first started teaching the letters, we also became bilingual, and so we could speak English. So already during annexation, we're already ripe with to be hijacked because we could speak the language already. It was easy. There'd be a very quick transition between Hawaiian and English to only English. And so that's how it became a predominantly English culture. And then just recently in the 90s, I believe, in the 90s, it became standard to teach Hawaiian language in schools here.
Jeez, that's a good way to destroy a culture. It's to destroy their language, man. It's like the blueprint. It's what these bloodthirsty nations do, going around acquiring people and then imposing their language on them. And it just changes the whole culture. I'm curious though, what did the missionaries think when they came to Hawaii and they start to hear these? So they're coming obviously with a hardcore religious slant to them, and they're coming to Hawaii and they're hearing the stories about Pele, the fire god, and are they thinking these people are fucking savages? These people are praying
Absolutely.
to the volcano, and like, don't they know we've got God? And like, what are you doing? Like, so what was their interpretation of your culture and your stories, and did they try to destroy that? Because it seems to me like I'm just a casual observer. I've been to Hawaii, I don't know, a dozen times or so, but it seems to me that I still hear those stories. I still know that the Hawaiians have a fondness and a connection to these gods, volcano gods and things like that. So I still know of it. So it couldn't have been, destroyed from the culture altogether. But I'm curious, did the missionaries try to get you guys off of that and onto their thing, or did they allow for there to be both competing sort of beliefs, or is it even a belief system, or how does it all work?
So absolutely, the missionaries were like, no, that's a demon. That's you're praying to demons, guys. Yeah. Enough of this crap. This is devil worship, and they banned the hula. They banned
that's just
the worship.
Can't dance, man. That's all. They didn't want to feel stupid, so they said we got to get rid of this dancing stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Looking at it when the first people arrived, or the first Westerners arrived here, and they saw nakedness and hip gyrations, it's like, oh, this is so they were overwhelmed, and they wanted to just get rid of all of that. And that was the attitude, basically, that they needed to bring civility to us, and they needed to make us good, God-fearing folk, and get rid of this horrible devil worship religion. And for us, it was interesting. The Hawaiians really took to Christianity because of our religion, our understanding. Because the ancient Hawaiian religion had so many gods. Essentially, this is my interpretation of it. Essentially, it was a religion based on experience and connection. So all of our mythology, our heroes, like, of Maui, who appeared in Moana, like that. That's pretty much a pan-oceanic hero. And so something like that. He was a hero because of all the things he did for his people, and the things that are within the myths, the information contained within the legends, actually show you a history, an embellished history, albeit it's just easier to remember that way. But it shows you a history of the things that Hawaiians discovered along the way, or other Polynesians may have discovered along the way. Things that you might want to know in terms of, like, okay, so how do we sail? How do we do certain protocols for certain ceremonies? All of that was contained in the myths and the legends and the stories. And so even Pele represented certain things about, she represented a force of nature. She represented emotions that are within the human being. It was just a connection, a unity between earth and human beings, the environment and human beings. That's really what the religion was about. And that's why there were so many gods, because you're personifying existence itself.
Yeah.
And so they took to the Christian religion because they're like, oh yeah, God's great. God's wonderful. God is love and all that. We have Kane. Kane is God for us, and we have Lono. He's also, so your God also grows the plants. We have Lono for that, and your God is vengeful. We have Ku and Pele for that. We have all the
wanting to add on, like, oh, we'll take your God. We'll add one more God to our thing, and they're like, no, there can only be one. And you're like, no, but we got all these guys with all these other guys over here. They're great. They're like, no, one God only, right? So they probably weren't thrilled with that. But I like how accepting you guys were. You're just like, sure, we'll take your God. I mean, he sounds reasonable. Let's add him to our.
And they weren't even allowed to speak to the people first. They were actually only allowed to convene with the royalty at the time, Kamehameha and Kahumanu, yes.
Okay.
So
and where were they coming from?
So the first ones were, I forget. I feel like they were British, but then the second ones that came for were American. So I know the American missionaries were called for first. So yeah, so we had American missionaries that came down to teach Kahumanu, and so Kahumanu was the pretty much the queen. She was the consort of Kamehameha II. And so Kamehameha I passed away. Kamehameha II was his son. And then Kahumanu was Kamehameha's favorite wife. And so, the regent, there you go. So she basically ran everything because the king at the time was a young boy. He couldn't really run anything.
Yeah.
So,
they sort of shared the throne, but she was in charge.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I forget the exact terminology of it, but yeah, that's it. So she was running stuff, and the missionaries came by and spoke to her, and they also spoke to all the other people in the royal family and the cabinet, essentially. And so everybody agreed and said, all right, well, we'll pass this on to our people. We think this is pretty cool. Pass it on to the people. And by the way, we'll also learn how to read and write. So good deal. So that came in. But eventually it became, like give an inch and they take a mile.
Of course.
So then it didn't stop at just teaching about God and language or literacy and stuff like that. Then it was like, well, we need you to stop praying to your gods. And now we need you to stop speaking your language. And now we need you to just forget about all of that. all of the stuff you were doing before, and just do what we want you to do, because that's the only good way to be, you know? Like,
yeah.
That's what it became. So that was the start of it, though. The missionaries coming here and the royal family allowing it to be disseminated throughout the kingdom was the beginning of the brainwashing. That's what I call it.
Yeah, and I know you guys got a lot of Mormon missionaries there, because there's a lot of you see a lot of Hawaiians playing at BYU and playing football at Utah and all these places.
Polynesians are Mormons.
Yeah. There's a huge community. And that's there's been a big push by the church. So you come from a land that is literally came into existence due to volcanoes. So it is reasonable to have this connection, whether literally or symbolically or both, or through culture, to have this connection to the volcanoes. And what a perfect symbolism, because on the one hand, if it wasn't for the volcanoes, you wouldn't have a home, but you also have to understand that with volcanoes comes the fact that they explode, and that is a problem. So I told you when we were chatting, I said I would tell you my Hawaii story. So my Hawaii story is this. It's 1983, and we are in Kona. And it's me and my mom and my dad. And my dad was a flight instructor. Not at the time, but he had been a flight instructor. So he knew how to fly Cessnas and planes like that. And he liked to do that. So we were there. And that morning he decided he was going to rent a Cessna and fly around and just check everything out. My mom and I just kind of waited. We waited in the car, or we did something. I think we went and did something, came back a little later to pick him up. We're waiting there to pick him up, and you see him come down, and he pulls the plane over, but it's still going. He gets out, runs around behind it, comes over to me, and he starts saying, "Come here. You need to come here. Just jump over this fence." And my mom's like, "What's going on?" And he's like, "Kilauea had just started erupting." And so I jumped the fence. I got in the passenger side of this Cessna, and we took off. And because he's hearing over the radio, Kilauea, it just started erupting. So we take off, and we get there, and there's only one aircraft besides us. It's a helicopter, and we started circling. And I'll tell you, I've never been so scared in my life. I don't know if you've ever been in a Cessna, but it's like flying in a Volkswagen Bug. It's not. It is not fill you with a sense of stability, or it feels like you can look out the window and see all the, I mean, it kind of freaks you out. And that was the first time I'd ever been in one. And we're circling an active volcano that is, and we're just like flipping it. Now, to be fair, it wasn't like exploding lava like you see on Discovery Channel or anything like that. But you could see the lava inside it. And it was throwing the plane like all over the place. Like I wanted to throw up for sure. It was super dangerous probably. And by the time my dad finally was like, we got to get out because we don't have enough gas to make it much longer. By the time we left, there were 20 other helicopters and planes. This was the first time Kilauea started erupting. That was the day it started erupting. And we were the second aircraft there, and I got to look down on it. And it has been erupting from that moment to this day, still going. And it was such a trip to be able to do that. And I got I always loved Hawaii, but after having that experience where you like, even in the process, I was like, I was 10 or 11 years old. I knew that this was going to be one of the 5 coolest things that ever happened to me in my entire life, was to fly in an airplane over an exploding volcano. And so I have this connection to Hawaii that nobody can ever take away from me, because because whenever someone plays that game, 2 Truths and a Lie, I always say that I've flown in a plane over a volcano, and nobody ever thinks that really happened, but it actually is true. So
that's too fantastical just to be a lie. Like, you wouldn't,
right.
You wouldn't come up with all of that amazing stuff as a lie.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's amazing, man.
Yeah, man. So I love, I don't know. And so I grew up in Southern California, and we would, if we'd go on a vacation, we'd have like Marriott miles that we would cash in, and we would always go to Whalers Village in Maui to stay there. And so, I mean, I have really fond, memories of it. In 1988, which was a couple years after this volcano situation, my dad passed away from a heart attack at 46. It was totally unexpected. I was 16 years old. And when that happened, over Christmas break for school, my mom and I, to try and just get away and get our head straight, we went to the one place where we felt really comfortable and could remember my dad, and we went to Hawaii back to Maui for 2 weeks, and rented a place before there was Airbnb. I don't know how you do it, but we did it, and we had a little condo there, and we just felt like that's where we needed to process everything, because we had been there so many times, and we had these cool stories, and in this fascinating relationship. And it's like with Hawaii, and it's like, well, where would we go when it gets really shitty and we want to feel good, and we want to have like the ability to think about things. We're like, well, then we should go to Hawaii and just chill out there. And so anyway, so to me, on a personal level, I have this connection with the islands, and my wife and I were just talking about that a couple of days ago. She was saying, well, my mother-in-law, her mom has this timeshare that they've had forever, and they've got all these. Well, Hawaii's opened up as a possible alternative. I'm like, let's go. My daughter's never been, so I have this really just amazing connection. And when you and Tony and I were talking, I thought it would be important for people to, I don't know, just hear about this, to hear the story of one of our 50 states that doesn't get the respect that it deserves. It doesn't get the airplay. I mean, we don't even consider, we're like, oh, voting in elections. Well, are they going to calculate Hawaii's votes? It's like, who cares? We're really dismissive of it. It's pretty shitty, but that is the mentality for the majority of people that are in the continental United States. And I get a lot of listeners internationally, and I'm sure people internationally have no idea about this either, because at least being an American, you get a little bit of information about Hawaii, not much, but international listeners, I think, are going to be fascinated with this. So wrapping this up, is there a place people can get a hold of you? If they can reach out to me through my website, theoctopusofglobalcontrol.com. If you have questions for Alika, you can send them to me, or do you have a better solution for that?
Yeah, I'm usually on Instagram and Facebook, so you can just search for my name on Facebook, Alika Spahn Naihe. Or you can go on Instagram under Hau'oli Art Alika. You probably have some show notes for the spelling of that.
I will put links in the description for people to check out your art, to connect with you, and comment on the new logo, which I think the comments I've got, people are like, that's pretty fucking cool looking. So I'm appreciative of that. Alika, thank you so much for coming on and for breaking our minds down a little bit and giving us some really good information here.
You're very welcome. And in a final piece for anybody who wants to come to Hawaii, that hasn't been to Hawaii, just really simple. Just come here and look at it as a completely different country, because it is. So don't assume you're in a little California or a little Texas or a little anything US. Come to Hawaii, look at it as a different country, and just respect everybody there.
When you get off the airplane, at least in Maui, where they have where you get off and you kind of come down the staircase, the mobile staircase and everything, and you get that first whiff of Hawaiian air. It is unforgettable. It is I will always remember the way Maui smells. The humidity and and you just get off and I'm like, oh, I love it. I just love it. It smells like flowers. The people are super cool. It's a place. I know I sound like an ad for the Hawaiian Tourism Board, but
all my friends that come here, they all say the same thing. The air smells like flowers.
Yeah, it's unmistakable. Alika, thanks so much. We'll talk to you later.
Thank you, man. Thank you so much. Had a great time.